And then, okay, there we go. I pressed record, it's recording. So I can pause it.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to a conversation that matter brought to you by the KDPM Equity Institute. And I'm so excited for today's conversation. And I was about to say Dr. Natascha Pennycooke. Listen, I am always here to give Black women their flowers, and I know how hard you work. But before we get into the conversation, I'd like to introduce today's very special guest. Natascha Pennycooke Psychotherapy. She is a psychotherapist and a consultant. Natascha specializes in facilitating wellness workshops to create awareness and building mental health strategies for long term change, focusing on the mental health aspects of emotional safety and trust, while addressing the importance of creating an anti racist environment of inclusion and belongingness to support the creation of equitable and sustainable workplace practices. Natascha has shared her expertise at international and national psychological conferences and is sought out after for her passionate speaking style to speak at various community and corporate events worldwide. Now you see why we had to have Natascha on today's show. Natascha, thank you so much for saying yes and welcome.
Of course. Thank you for having me. I'm really excited for this conversation. There's a lot of nuggets and gems that we need to pull everyone into. So I'm really looking
Yeah,
forward to having this chat today.
absolutely. And I know this will not be the only chat. I'm letting
No.
everyone know. Yes, there will be a part two because we will not cover everything, but let's
Mhm.
dive right in.
Yes.
I've read your incredible bio, and I always know that we're always in different seasons in terms of our purpose.
Hmm.
What season are you in right now? What are you really excited about in terms of your company, the work that you do, and also your aspirations in terms of your big dream for what you hope for?
Yes, right now, I personally and professionally, I'm in a season of growth. There was a lot of personal stuff that I went through over the last couple of months. There was a loss in my family and all of that. And I took time, some well needed downtime to heal because, as Black women, we don't care for ourselves enough. And I was an intentional to take some slowing down time to make sure that I got what I needed. The same thing that I tell clients and people that I work with. I getting better at practicing what I preach. So I
Yeah.
took some downtime. So now I am in a shoot for the stars growth stage right now, building out some of the exciting things at the back end of my business, as well as building up my brand again. So I'm really, really excited. I've launched a new mindset shift coaching program because we know, especially as women, as Black women, as racialized folks, there's a lot of things that are out there in society that tells us that we can't. And unfortunately, we internalize a lot of it, too much of it, and that plays with our
Mhm.
sense of self and our mindset. So what I've
Yes.
recognized with as my years of experience as a psychotherapist, what I've recognized is that, people come into therapy for the hurt and the pain, but there's also a subset in individuals who are not in hurt, who are not in pain, who are really also in that growth phase. And I recognize
Yeah.
there's people who need the help to build and to work on their mindset. So that's something that
Yeah.
I'm launching.
The
Super
mindset
excited
of
about that.
growth. I love that. The
Yes,
mindset of
yes,
growth. And,
yes.
and I think sometimes we forget that growth is uncomfortable and there are growth in pains that we go through. And we
Hmm.
also need support for that, right?
Yes,
And,
yes.
and this is why I'm really excited about the conversation today. And I know there's so much that we will be talking about. But I wanted to start off with, building on something that you said, like even yourself as a practicing psychotherapist, you need to make sure that you're practicing and you're doing, walking
Absolutely.
your talk. And I'm saying this in this container of society where cultural identity, especially as Black women, that identity that's imposed on us of being the strong, the strong Black woman, we are resilient. I have had Black professionals and Black folks who told me I do not want to be described as resilient,
Hmm.
right? I'm no longer resilient. I don't want
Yes.
to be resilient.
Yeah. It's exhausting.
And yes, it's a lot, and we see that showing up in different ways. But as we talk about the importance of psychological safety, and for me, one of my pet peeves is the constant conversation we have around managing our mental health.
Yes.
I think it adds to the stereotypes of us being strong Black women. I'm
Yes,
not
it
saying we
does.
don't have to manage our mental health,
Yeah.
but what I'd like to see is a broader conversation where we look at psychological well-being as the baseline, And yes, racism interrupted our lives, right? White structural whiteness and white supremacy systems and systems of racialization continue to impact our mental health no matter where we go, where we work. I want you to talk about the concept of black tears versus white tears, because in a discussion with a group of black professionals, I brought up the concept of, do you give yourself permission to be vulnerable?
Mm.
And where do you go to exhale and to just let the tears fall? And I noticed that there is a knowledge and awareness gap with that whole concept of us actually putting into practice our own psychological safety,
Yes.
well-being, a strategy for it, or even just the idea of it. Can you talk about this a little bit, and what is your hope for the future of work, and why is psychological safety and well-being should be an important baseline in the workplace?
Yeah, great question. So let's go into the white tears first, white tears versus black tears first, right? There's this piece around white fragility and this idea that individuals who are white, who present whiteness, that they are fragile. And what comes from that is this idea that individuals who are white, so white tears, white, a lot of times white women, feeling
Mm-hmm.
as if, you know what, they don't have that power, the same power that white men have. So there's this idea now for white women, in order to have some of that power, they may have the whiteness power, but not the male power, the patriarchal power. So there's this
Mm-hmm.
idea that with the tears, it's a way to pull in some power
Mm-hmm.
versus Black individuals, Black women with the tears, it's not looked at as the same because of the various structures and we know and you talk about this all the time how race is a social construct. It's a social construct that is embedded and built into the systems and the power and the privilege systems that are there and those systems of oppression. So when we really look at that and we look at that as a systemic level, that has been ingrained in everything, the systems of healthcare, of education, of justice system, the legal system. So now when we scale that back to really have an understanding of these tiers where they come from, whiteness as a system has
Mm-hmm.
been taught of through the hierarchy as higher up,
Mm-hmm.
whereas now the tiers of white women are looked at as higher up than the tiers of other racialized individuals, right? So
Yeah.
then when we look at that, it's embedded now where these white tiers are at the top and black tiers for you and I were more seen as at the bottom.
Right. And there's the vilification of this.
Yes.
And
Yes.
it builds on the self negation. What I've noticed is that because we know the importance of feeling our feelings, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
your work is all about helping people to move through the powerful process of feeling our emotions and
Yes.
building trust in self. And I can imagine that it is hard because you're building this inner trust with self, but then you go back into the world, and the world forces you to betray yourself
Yes.
over and over
Over
and
and
over
over.
again.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
psychological safety and well being as the baseline is something that I'm
Mm-hmm.
hoping a lot of organizations and leaders understand that it's a necessary skill set when it comes to human equity. And
Yes.
whatever part of the human equity work that you're doing, whether you're looking at anti-blackness, anti-Asianness, anti-Semitism, anti-indigeneity,
Yes.
whatever the part of the human equity that we're looking at, we need that psychological safety. And one of the reframing that I hope to see in the workplace is understanding that white folks who have been racialized as white also need that psychological safety so that they can do the work.
Yes.
Again, why do you think it's necessary? What are you seeing in your work,
Mhm.
especially as you travel and you speak globally as well?
Right. So, what I'm seeing a lot of times, especially from a psychological safety lens, there is safety in belonging, right? There's
Mm,
safety in belonging. When we are in spaces where I see me, either other Black women who have braids in their hair, who's wearing the bright, flashy clothes, I feel like I belong. Therefore, I feel safe because I know that I'm not going to be judged negatively. I'm not going to be talked down to. I'm not going to be, people are not going to try to touch my hair because that is the norm in that culture, in that society, what's happening there. So there's that sense of belonging. So what happens, belonging is super important because it is part of the foundation of psychological safety. And it's making sure that I can have a conversation without being interrupted, without being questioned, without my experience being negated.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So that is so important as well. So now when we look at the workplace in
Mm-hmm.
terms of psychological safety, and I'll get back to different places that I've gone to, but now when we talk about like the workplace and the psychological safety in the workplace, it's how safe am I to show up as me? Will I be questioned? Will I be judged? Will my thoughts be belittled? Will there be repercussions to my
Mm-hmm.
safety and having that job, which means a safety for my well-being and my family? Right.
Yeah.
So, what I'm seeing a lot of the different places that I've gone to speak, I was recently in Detroit for the Association of Black Psychologists conference, and I spoke about Ubuntu and community and healing. There is
Yeah.
such a, it's so important to be seen, and I
Mm-hmm.
think that's what's happening a lot in the workplaces. Workers are not being seen for their true self, right?
Yeah.
People are
Yeah.
being seen in showing up or code switching or all those other things that we have historically done so we can fit in, so we can
Mm-hmm.
be safe in our work and what we're doing, but really about being seen authentically. That's like a catchword everyone's talking about,
Yeah.
being authentic,
Yeah.
right? But really, what does this mean?
Yeah.
What does it
Right.
really mean to be
What is
authentic?
yeah,
Right?
yeah. And again, when you look at it within the context of, do I feel safe enough to belong? Do I feel safe enough to even show up fully as myself?
Yes.
Um, One of the things that always comes up when I'm speaking to leaders, especially C-suite leaders, who majority of them happens to be white, I remind them that they need to put their psychological safety plan in place so that they can do the work needed
Yes. Yes.
for the employees that they have been entrusted with, right?
Right.
So there are
Right.
multiple levels. I think what we need to see in terms of the support needed for leaders and also for workers for employees in the workplace is the concept of each of us need to understand what we need on a psychological well-being perspective so that we can understand the different intercultural wellness practices that are needed, because
Mm.
for centuries we have inherited the workplace system, the wellness systems, the leadership practices and
Yep.
behaviors, right? All rooted in a patriarchal and very cis heteronormative way of thinking and being.
Yes.
Now we're disrupting that.
Yeah.
And now a lot of folks are raising their hands and saying, yeah, actually, I don't feel safe. I don't think I've ever felt safe, even for myself. It's only when I left the
Mm-hmm.
bank I realized that, yeah, I was never psychologically safe, right?
Right.
It's like walking on eggshells and tiptoeing.
Yeah.
And a study that we did around with with Black women, and we focused specifically on Black women because it was necessary, because the Black woman's voice is very seldom given space just to be. And we see that even when we were trying to get funding to do this project, we got a lot of pushback. Why are you focused on Black women? Because we need to focus on Black women.
Yes. Yes.
Um, what would you say? Because many Black employees are walking through life with that expectation of that psychological violence. I think a
Yes.
lot of us have normalized it.
Yes.
Like,
True.
oh, I'm supposed to push through, but
Yeah.
I think we're also coming to a point where we realize pushing through is no longer an option,
It's no longer an
right?
option. And we've done it for so long because we've had to survive, because we've
Yeah,
had to make space to be able to live, right? We've taught ourselves to push through, but you're right. No longer are people um settling. That's the word. No
yeah,
longer are people settling to
yeah.
push through, wanting to have spaces and places to belong and to be psychologically safe, as we should.
As we should. It's a human right. So, what
Yes.
advice do you have for Black folks who are navigating this space, but also for the leaders out there who are doing this work and who might be on a, I would say, very low unconscious incompetence when it comes to understanding that skill set as a necessary skill set for doing the work of human equity?
Yeah. Let's start with the leaders because I think as Black folks, we've been doing this forever and always, right? To be able to navigate, to be able to keep our jobs, to be able to work, feed our families, all the things. So let's start discussing what I believe leaders can start doing. As leaders, start looking around at your staff and start understanding, does my staff represent the populations that I work with, the populations that I serve, the populations that I want to bring in as clientele? And if your first instinct is no, then you're starting to recognize there is a problem.
Yeah.
And what we need to do is start looking, what are your hiring practices, your recruiting practices? Where are you going? Are
Mm-hmm.
you getting word of mouth where people who are already working there, who you've already identified, don't
Mm-hmm.
look like the clientele that you want to work with and you want to open up towards? And start really thinking, how can I go out there and attract people, other racial groups, other ethnicities, other orientations to come into my work?
Mm-hmm.
And then start recognizing, is it safe for them to be here? Right? Is it safe for them to be here? What is the culture that I have built up? How how are we speaking? Do we make those little jokes that are microaggressions that are actually
Stereotype.
macroaggressions? Right?
Right.
Are there certain stereotypes that we believe? What are our policies? What are procedures? Start really looking and understanding. Are you making space for a whole variety of individuals to work here? And being able to do that will start to get some questioning going, start to build that awareness. And awareness is fantastic, but we are really here for change.
Right.
So as you are turning into that change maker, it's
Mm-hmm.
starting really to invite people in to look at your policies, your procedures, the makeup of your employees to be able to really help. Because a lot of times, leaders, they go to the racialized people in their organization, the one or the few racialized people, and expect them to do the work. We are tired of doing that because it puts us in a position of, oh, I have to do this or else my job is not secure. And what that actually tells you is that it's not psychologically safe for that one or few racialized individuals. So there's a lot of work from the leaders level, from the C-suite leaders, as you speak of. There's a lot of work that needs to be done from that level. And then when we speak about the Black staff, the racialized staff, it's about really looking for other individuals who are racialized within the workplace and being able to come together and build community. Right now, there's a lot of individuals who are racialized who may not recognize that there is an issue going on. And what I say a little bit about that, we've drank the Kool-Aid. We grew up in these systems, we're educated in these systems. We have internalized those dialogues and those understandings of who we are. A lot of times we are an oppressed oppressor, right? We end
Mm.
up,
Ooh, we gotta go back.
we
Oh,
got to
back.
go back.
Right above. Like we are the
Right?
oppressed. Oppressed. Natasha, break this
Mm.
down for us.
Okay,
Tell us.
let me break this down. Let me break it down. We, as racialized folks, as Black women, we're oppressed. We recognize that, right? The hierarchical systems that I spoke about earlier. But then what
Mm-hmm.
happens? We then start oppressing other people who also look like us.
Yes.
We then oppress other individuals who may be trying to climb, trying to connect. We've bought into this tokenism being the only one.
Yeah.
And when we do that, we become the oppressed oppressor.
I've never heard it put together that way. Okay. We have
Yes.
become I usually
Yes.
frame it around the lines of we have all been socialized in the white racial frame. So, yes,
Yes.
there is someone who can look like you and who can
Yes.
inflict that harm.
Yes.
And it brings me to mind, that movie, Ava DuVernay's new movie, Origin, which is based
Mm.
on Pulitzer Prize winner, Black author Isabel Wilkerson. And I haven't read the book, but I have heard about it. And Cass talks a lot about that hierarchy and how race sits on top of that hierarchy, because that in superiority versus inferiority follows us in every part of the various systems, right? And
Mm.
it is something we need to acknowledge in order for us to fully understand what is psychological well. This is why I'm fascinated by this concept.
Mm.
What is the baseline for psychological well-being? It cannot be us always managing our mental health, our community health, our economic well-being within the system. We
Mhm.
need to look at something different, and this is
Yeah.
what I'm hoping the conversation will help folks to think about
Yes.
things differently
Yes.
and also to move differently. Now, recently in the media, and unfortunately, our one of our Black sisters, Kika Kojo Institute, got, I would say, digitally lynched by the media. And I think again about how those leaders who did the okay for this story did not meet, psychological well-being and safety. I don't think they even thought about their employees or the backlash that the Black community would
Right.
go through
Yes.
witnessing this. I want you to talk about the concept of, I think sometimes as leaders believe that there is a bit of a innocent bystanders. They're
Mm,
innocent bystanders
hmm
when that work
hmm
is done. You talk from a psychotherapy perspective.
Yeah.
What happens when leaders allow psychological violence to go by
Mm.
without taking responsibility for the outcome?
Yes.
And then
Yes.
I want to talk about this article written by the School of Journalism as well, which I thought the writers did a fantastic job. But first, what happens to the innocent bystanders
Hmm.
when a group witnesses such an attack, both within the workplace, but also folks on the outside as well?
Yes. So there's this thing called linked fate. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Linked fate. So
Mm-hmm.
someone who looks like me, walks like me, talks like me, thinks like me, if something awful happens to them, I'm automatically going to link it to my fate. Right? Linked fate. This is why we as Black people, whenever there is a Black person who is shot or murdered or gunned down or police violence, we feel it to our core
Yeah,
because there's this linked fate. So not only is it the racial trauma element, where here is trauma to another racialized individual, where I am feeling it because we're linked by the color of skin, but there's linked fate, thinking this happened to this person, therefore it may happen to me because we have this thing that's linked. Okay.
right. Okay.
So there's that. So now when we see another Black woman doing the consulting work, a lot of the work that you and I both do, who, and you have to understand the context of the story. This was 2 years ago. This was not recent that
This
this
wasn't really, yeah,
this was
yeah,
not recent
yeah,
where, a couple of weeks before the article came out where it happened. This was 2 years ago.
yeah,
So from a, I would say, a workplace workshop that happened a number of years ago, there was an individual who was challenged, right? And as we're speaking about, this is hard stuff. This is hard work that we're talking about. Race, racism, discrimination, white fragility, white tears, all this is hard stuff because of the way we've been socialized. So, of
yeah.
course, whenever we have these conversations, and maybe this is a good disclaimer for everyone, this is a hard conversation. It's hard to
Mhm,
digest, hard to listen to. You're going to feel it in the core and the pit of your stomach. So I
mhm.
can imagine that's probably what happened with the individuals who were in the audience of that conversation, right? Now, it came out whenever it came out. And of course, I don't know all of the details where a
Right.
person ended up taking their life or dying by suicide. And then what came out from that was all of the things that you've been reading about in the media and things like that. But what we
Rich.
really want to, yes,
No,
go
no, no,
ahead.
no. I was like, go ahead.
Yeah. But what we really want to be clear of, the harm that can be done for all of the individuals included. So, this other Black woman, Kike, she's been doing this work. And basically, as you mentioned, where it was like cyber lynching of the work that she was done, of the reasons why doing this work, and really dragged her through the media
Yeah,
because of the work that was done. So there's harm there because
there's
what
harm
it
there.
actually says that it says that this work is not important, that we shouldn't be doing this. All of those things get the undertow, the underpinnings of all of
Yeah,
that, right? Not to mention also the individual who died by suicide. This being put out there for their family and friends to relive. There's trauma on both ends.
on
And I
both.
don't think the media recognizes how harmful this is. Yes, it is harmful for this white body who died by suicide, and is very much harmful to this Black body who is alive, who has family, who has friends,
Yeah.
and is being and essentially has been their, I guess, their authority has been called into question.
Yes, yes, and what I like about the article by
Yes,
the School of Journalism, it
yes,
talks about why did the newsroom contravene guidelines about suicide coverage in reporting on the death of a former principal. And to me, that is the kind of leadership we need to see in the C-suite, and we need to see in
yes,
workplaces. Because a
yes,
number of news articles who continue the cyberbullying and the cyber lynching really got me questioning, are we taking 100 steps back?
yes.
Because there wasn't that responsibility of the psychological well-being of the
Mm-hmm.
person on the receiving end of all that harm.
Right.
And I think that this is where I'm hoping that folks really get to think about what needs to change on my leadership side, what needs to
Mhm.
be different, right?
Mhm.
If we start thinking about psychological well-being as a social and human right,
Yes.
I'm hoping that leaders will start thinking about what needs to change, not just in my policy, but what needs to change in my behavior, so that such stories don't continue to perpetuate the harm that is already existing and the harm that we're all trying to understand.
Yes.
Now, I know that there's so much more we can talk about in terms of that topic, but we're almost at time, and I wanted to, for you to give, a few words, like for anybody who's watching this who may not know where to start when it comes to creating their own personal psychological safety well-being plan. What
Mhm.
tips do you have for them?
Yeah. I love that. The psychological safety well-being plan.
Yes.
Start with understanding what makes you feel uncomfortable because there are some people who are not aware what's happening in their body in those times,
Mhm.
right? Understand what makes you feel uncomfortable and why is that? Is it that you go into the workplace and every time you have a new hairstyle, someone's touching your hair and you're not sure why that's uncomfortable for you? And start with there, right? And look at the policies and procedures. What is there? What is written in the workplace? What
Mhm.
is, but the thing is, what's written and what is actually held up, two very different
Different
things.
things. Yes.
And if it is written there and it's not held up, let's start questioning. Why is this? And if nothing is written, then also let's questioning. Why is this? Because that may be part of your safety plan that you need to know wherever you navigate, you can have access to safety. And I think that is huge. Historically,
Yeah.
we have not had access to
Access.
safety,
Yes.
right? So
Yes.
as you start your plan, that needs to be the first thing. Do I have access to safety in this area?
Yes. I love that. I love, and I think sometimes we forget asking the question is powerful enough, because this is the
Yes.
beginning
Yes.
of, you don't need to have a full plan to be
Right.
successful,
You
but
have to
this
start
is
step one.
the beginning. Just step one. Take that one step.
Take
I
that
think
one step.
what I'm taking from you is that just take that one step and
Yeah,
start there and let the
start
rest.
and then we'll come back.
Yeah. So now for you, on your own personal wellness plan, what is that favorite song, food, or book, or like what is that thing that just gets you going and giving you access to that joy?
Oh, you know what? I've been reading this book, Homecoming by Dr. Thema. I love me some Dr. Thema. It's called Homecoming, right? As we think of our psychological safety plan, how are we positioning ourselves to come home to self? To come home to self. It's a book about fear and trauma, but really